principals always look like lesbians?
I hate the arts festival, but it pays for the football team.
Nice ass.
Do not lust in your heart. Jesus, you're right.
I don't want that drag queen nurse peeking in at me.
Drag queens won't bother you. Worry about priests.
Leave me alone. I've got to fill out my Special Olympics application.
No, this isn't a fan parody. This is an actual, real, and most importantly, official English dub of a Japanese anime. One where the main cast constantly breaks character, does politically incorrect jokes, and seems to be making it up as they go. And they kind of are. Welcome to Ghost Stories, dub that broke every rule and became a cult classic.
Oh my god, what the hell's happening here? These are the fastest lip slaps I've ever had to sing!
It is a widely held belief in the anime community that subs are simply superior to dubs. Many who are deeply entrenched in a community would rather be caught dead than watch their favorite anime dubbed. While I personally also prefer the subtitled versions most of the time, there are some exceptions. Even the most hardline of sub enjoyers would have to agree with that. Some of the shows with great dubs will include classics such as Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Bakano, or Cowboy Bebop, with many fans of the latter two even claiming the dub to be the superior version of their respective show. Another classic phenomenon of this would be the Studio Ghibli movies. Legendary director and producer Hayao Miyazaki has gone out and said that he wants his movies to be watched, not read, preferring people to watch his movies in their native language. Naturally, every person is free to watch these movies in whichever way they prefer, but this does explain the high quality of their dubs across the board. However, there's one more anime dub that has snuck its way into the public zeitgeist. One that is so offensive, so hilariously over the top, and so unique that you can't help but laugh at it. I'm of course talking about Ghost Stories. But before we can find out what makes this dub so special, we have to take a quick look at the history behind the scenes to figure out what led to this development in the first place. And the actual history behind it is surprisingly hard to accurately figure out. The popular myth that is spread on the internet is the following. The anime flopped so hard that Studio Pierrot wanted to recoup at least some of their losses, letting ADV dub the show however they saw fit. Not only the director Stephen Forster, but many of the voice actors who worked on the dub stated something to that effect in the years following the release of the show. However, some critics have recently debunked parts of this myth. The series had a quite successful run in Japan at first, with it even receiving a proper dub by Animax. However, when that studio turned to ADV for a North American release, is where some of these misunderstandings seem to stem from. Forster recently stated that the attorney who negotiated the licensing deal between Animax and ADV was the one who told him that they weren't happy with the show and they were allowed to do whatever it took to make some money with it. In fact, apart from some loose rules, don't change the characters' names, don't change the way the ghosts are defeated, and don't change the basic plot of each episode, there were basically no limitations what ADV could and couldn't do. But while we might never know the entire truth behind the rewrite of the script, in some ways it doesn't even matter. According to Monica Riel, the voice actress of Momoko, the recording became a game to see who could record the funniest lines with no one really being concerned about crossing the line, which in turn led to some of the craziest and most out there scenes really capturing the essence of the early 2000s humor. The first and possibly most important change the dub made was to the main cast. Most of them were quite standard and typical in the original, not really bringing anything unique to the table. The same cannot be said for the dub in the slightest. Satsuki is probably the one of the main cast who keeps her personality mostly intact. In the original, she's a responsible and brave protagonist, whereas in the dub, she turns into the straight man, reacting to the absurdity with sarcasm and deadpan humor, letting the others go completely off the rails with their lines.
I'm sure I'll live a long, miserable life of heartbreak and alcoholism before a ghost takes me out.
Hajime turns from Satsuki's childhood friend, who is slightly crushing on her, into a full-blown teenage pervert. He constantly makes crude remarks about any girls that crosses his path, checking out girls apparently being his primary purpose of being. He in turn becomes a parody of the typical useless male lead in anime, taking the form of an internet shitposter.
I'm too young to die. The only person I've had sex with is my babysitter.
Momoko, in the original, is a sweet, shy, and spiritual girl with a sixth sense for ghosts. In my opinion, she has some of the funniest lines in the dub by turning it into an aggressive evangelical Christian who quotes the Bible and tries to convert the others at every possible opportunity. Satirizing Western portrayals of devout Christians, her over-the-top nature perfectly complements the show's supernatural elements.
Your mother was so full of Jesus, she saved those souls from hell by banishing them into the forest.
Leo is supposed to be the brains of the group. Smart, analytical, he normally leads the group through any tough situations they're facing. In the dub, however, he turns into full-blown conspiracy theorist. What originally is just a cookie-cutter anime nerd turns into a satire of an unhinged internet user you could find in places like 4chan.
Well, I was planning on watching the Stargate SG-1 marathon tonight, but these are the episodes without Claudia Black, and they suck, so I'm open.
But if there's one single character that defines this dub, it's without a shadow of a doubt Heiichiro. In the original, he's Satsuki's shy and timid younger brother who finds his voice and grows braver over the course of the show. However, in the dub, he's one of the most unpredictable characters, switching between unintelligible babble and weird, disturbing dialogue.
Never thought I'd say this, but I'm with Momoko on this one.
If the Ghost Story dub did one thing well, it's bringing eyes onto the show. From the moment of its release, it became the topic of discussion amongst many fans, but not all of the reception was exactly positive. Premiering at Otakon 2005, the voice actors were booed off stage. Many people viewed the show as disrespectful to the original, seeing as they made such significant changes to the script and the characters. The show seemed to have found its audience rather quickly, however. Just the following year, it beat out an all-time classic in Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood to be crowned as the dub of the year. In the following years, the show got a cult following, mostly thanks to the many clips of it that were circulating on the internet. And while I do see where people are coming from when criticizing the show for its drastic changes, I think that kind of misses the point of the show. Rather than just being seen as any old dub, I think it would be more fitting to view the dub as an entirely new show, something like a parody or an abridged series. In fact, I'd argue Ghost Stories was the show that paved the way for many of the abridged series you can still see floating around today. Sure, parodies were a thing before then, but not nearly to the extent that they were after its release. Yu-Gi-Oh! The abridged series, Dragon Ball Z abridged, and Sword Art Online abridged, one of my personal favorites, all became household names, and almost every major anime gets an abridged version nowadays. Call the Ghost Story dub a product of its time would be an understatement. Some of the jokes are not only crass and in poor taste, but also just straight up offensive. While many of them are still very funny, the overall product is something that could under no circumstances be replicated today. The main reason for that is the entirely different climate surrounding anime as a whole. Back in the early 2000s, anime in the West was still in its infancy, a very niche subculture. With less eyes on it as a whole, companies could get away with much riskier stuff compared to nowadays, because it would be no exaggeration to call anime mainstream today. Movies grossing millions of dollars, large companies like Crunchyroll built solely on distributing anime, the revenue to be found in the industry is seemingly endless. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you view it, this naturally means that companies and studios making anime are under much more scrutiny by the public. But not only the Japanese studios who, today, work closely with the translators, wouldn't allow such a dub to be created nowadays. The fans of any anime would be outraged if their show got a Ghost Story dub treatment. While some of the dubs of modern shows can be quite funny, think Konosuba or Kaguya-sama Love is War, it's all highly curated and scripted, and approved of by the original creators. Fans nowadays care way too much about preserving the character and stories of a show as best as possible, for them to be satisfied with a dub that is essentially an abridged show. And also, the general culture has shifted to a point where a dub like this simply wouldn't be acceptable. The raunchy humor that was widely accepted throughout the early 2000s wouldn't cut it anymore today. It would definitely be seen as too offensive, and for good reason. That type of humor simply isn't acceptable anymore. But while a one-to-one copy of the Ghost Story dub couldn't and shouldn't exist, its spirit still lives on today in the form of fan edits and parody dubs. Now, going so far as to actually call it the greatest dub of all time would probably be a reach. Maybe in relation to the quality of the original, sure, but realistically I can't put it on the same pedestal as some of the serious, well-made and great anime dubs out there. But, and this has to be said, there's no dub that's anything like this one. It took a bland, formulaic kids ghost show, something that would have probably been forgotten by now, and turned it into a cult classic. Sure, it might not have aged very well, and many of its jokes and pop culture references are outdated, but there's something oddly charming about it. Like a lightning in a bottle, it's something that only worked once and shouldn't be attempted again, but damn did it work the first time. The voice actors transformed the show into something special and unique. It was messy, offensive, hilarious, and totally unforgettable. The Ghost Story dub didn't just break the rules, it rewrote them in crayon. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking the video and leaving a comment, as well as subscribing to not miss out on any of my future content.